Hey everyone, and welcome back to Lights Out Latest. My name is Tristan, and I'm joined by my fellow Formula One friends Marina, Jason, and Steven as usual. We are ready to talk everything Formula One as expected. Today, we have a little bit of a special show. We have a couple of guest speakers here on the show today, both members of Tday Sports. We have Ethan Zaretsky and Marielle Reese. Marielle, Ethan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Happy to be here.
100%.
Welcome, guys. As Tristan said, we're doing a bit of a different episode this week. We're doing like an F1 for rookies. Ethan and Marielle, although may have watched some F1 or seen some of our content, not avid F1 fans. And so we're going to do for them and for you guys some basics. And they brought some questions for us as well. So I'm going to start with the thing. One sec. All right.
There we go.
So F1 for rookies, like I said. First and foremost, this is this year's drivers. Every year we have, every year recently we've had 10 drivers, 10 teams and 2 drivers per team. So that makes 20 total. But in the past, there's been a lot of difference. There have been like 24, right? If I'm not mistaken, Jason, there was like 24 before, 26.
Yeah, depending on the number of teams, we'll change the number of drivers. We've had a lot of teams leave until now. We're at 20 drivers, 10 teams. Actually, this is a little bit outdated. One of the drivers was dropped in the middle of season and changed out for a different one. But yeah, we could get into that a bit later.
Mr. DeVries.
Mr. Nick DeVries. So we also wanted to do a quick race weekend format. So normally on a normal weekend, you start off with practice sessions on the Friday. You have 2 practice sessions. They're each an hour long where the teams can test out new parts on the car. The drivers get to learn the track a little bit more. Then on Saturday, you have another practice session in the morning, and then you go into qualifying, which defines the grid positions for the race on Sunday. And then, of course, Sunday you have race day, which is like the general layout. But last year and this year, we have a new layout called the sprint race where that happens 6 times a year. And it's a bit of a different format. You have only 1 practice session. So this is particularly hard for the teams because they only have 1 chance to get the car correct. And the drivers only get 1 chance to, learn the track. Then immediately after the practice session on Friday, you already have what we call the sprint shootout, which is a mini qualifying session, which will set the grid for the sprint race. My bad. I think Jason may have called me because he looked like he was about to say something. Friday is qualifying for the race, not for the sprint.
There you go.
Anyways, I don't think I explained what qualifying truly was. I mean, I tell what it is, but I don't know if Jason or Steven, someone wants to really take a dive into qualifying.
I mean, yeah, it's basically just like a session of about 15 minutes, right? That's what about a qualifying session is.
There's 3 sessions, so qualifying it's 1 big session, but it's split into 3. Q1 is 18 minutes, Q2 I want to say is 15 or 16, and Q3 is 12 minutes.
Yeah, so basically it's just like she said, it's 3 sessions. Each team goes out for however many laps they want to set, basically trying to set the fastest lap possible so they can move on to qualifying. So there's certain cutoffs in each qualifying session. And then, if you make it, say, the top 10 Q1, you move on to Q2. If you make it top 10 in Q2, you make it on to Q3, and then so on and so forth. So you're basically just trying to get the best position possible you can for the race weekend.
Yeah, 5 drivers are dropped after every session. So in the first qualifying session, drivers 20 to 16 are dropped, and they're set in those positions. So grid position 20, 19, 18, 17, 16 are set once you're dropped. Those are the 5 slowest. And then in Q2, the next 5 slowest, so 15th, 14th, all the way to 11th are set. And then the top 10 in Q3 get to go for the top 10 positions and pole position, which is the starting position in first for the Grand Prix.
It's probably one of the most unique parts about motorsports as a whole, and F1 in particular, is qualifying. Because qualifying can strongly dictate your race. Like,
Absolutely.
in an NFL game, Yeah, the coin toss can dictate as to when you kick or receive in the second half, first half, and that's big. But like qualifying dictates possibly your literal finish for the race, depending on where your grid position is. So
Yeah.
100%. So, so Friday on a sprint weekend, you'll have the practice session, one and only, and you'll have the qualifying for Sunday's race. And in this year's kind of sprint format, Saturday is kind of like its own day. Saturday, you'll have a sprint shootout, which is a mini qualifying, so a mini version of what they just said. And then you have a sprint race, which is a third of the race, a full race distance, which is nice. It's for less points, but it's nice for the drivers. They get a little bit more running in at race speed, although they have a lot of mixed feelings about it, and we can talk about that maybe really a little later. Another important part of qualifying is tire allocations, but I don't want to talk the whole time. So if someone wants to kind of explain how the tire allocation goes down in F1.
I think this might have to be a Jason topic. I think Jason's all over this one.
Yeah, sure.
Oh yeah.
So tires is a huge part of Formula One, and there are kind of three types of tires. So you have the hards, the mediums, and the softs. The softs are the fastest, most grippiest tires, but they last the shortest amount of time. So like you could go out there on track and go really, really fast, but then you gotta make another pit stop really soon. While the hard tires can last almost the whole race depending on the track, but they're the slowest of the three tires. So teams are constantly like weighing between, well, do we want more stops in a faster tire or less stops in a harder tire? So that's like tire strategy in Formula One. And then we also have two different wet weather compounds. The green one and the blue one you see, that's the intermediate and the full wet compounds. They're only used in the rain. And the heaviest of rain is going to be the wet weather compound. And kind of like the in-between, kind of like damp track is going to be the green one, the intermediate. So that's a tire strategy. And usually during qualifying, you'll see teams stick to either the mediums or the softs because they're the fastest. And the reason why they don't just go softs for every qualifying run is because you only get so many tires per weekend. This is the tire allocation. Each team only gets a certain amount of tires, and you might not want to burn through all your soft tires during qualifying. So some of the faster teams will try and qualify on mediums, and then maybe a pair of softs at the end for pole position.
Yeah. Like he said, they only get 8 softs, 3 mediums, and 2 hards on a normal race weekend. So if they know for sure that this is a track where, the softs are they're going to degrade too fast during the race, then they for sure want to use all of those up earlier in the weekend, and likewise want to save maybe the hard tires. So it's an important part of the strategy for the team as well. Another important thing to note is that during the actual race, they're required to use 2 different tire compounds, whether that be the soft and the medium and the hard and the soft, doesn't matter, but they have to use 2 different tires. And so they have to also make sure that they have different options available. But what do they do this all for? Points, obviously. At the end of a race, points are awarded. 25th for the first position, 18th for the second, 15 for the third, and so on and so forth. It goes all the way down to 10th place, and then 11th through 20th does not get any points. And so that's kind of how the points breakdown goes. There's different points for the sprint, where the first person gets 8 points, and it goes down to 1. Only P1 through P8 get points. But these points then go to 2 different championships. The first being the Drivers' Championship. And I honestly couldn't find any good pictures of this trophy. But this picture on the bottom is like iconic for me. This was Abu Dhabi. Yeah. They were equal on points going to the last race, and so the championship trophy is just sitting right in between them and right before the race, and it's like, who's gonna take it? But yeah, basically whichever driver accumulates the most points over the season wins at the end of the season, or in this case, before the end of the season, because Max had enough points to finish this year a couple races ago. They also accumulate to the Drivers' Championship, or the Constructors' Championship, where it's the teams. So each team, like we said in the beginning, each team has 2 drivers. So they add up the points of the 2 drivers, and whichever team then has the most points at the end of the season will win the Constructors' Championship. this is Red Bull with Sebastian Vettel, and this is what the trophy looks like. And they keep putting on each year's winner at the end.
For a
That's
comparison,
kind of the unique part of F1 is that there's a team's competition and an individual competition.
yeah, the best way I was going to try to describe it in a comparison is like if Patrick Mahomes wins the MVP for the year, that's kind of like the closest you can get to like a driver's championship, whereas the Kansas City Chiefs are winning the constructors because they're the whole team. It's the whole organization.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why it's
It's like
important to have two drivers hitting on all cylinders. You know what I mean? Like, sure, Max Verstappen's winning every race, but Checo needs to perform because Red Bull could still get beat if both the Ferrari drivers are doing good or something like that.
Yeah. It's
So-
like you need your backup and your starting quarterback to win. To have a
Yes,
chance.
exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of what we had for basics. And then now, Marielle and Ethan, we have your questions. If you want to give it a go, what questions do you have for us on F1?
Okay, I guess I can start off. So my first, like, really, this is how I could tell I don't watch F1, was what's the difference between F1 and NASCAR? Because I thought they were the same thing for like the longest time.
Huh.
That's fair. That's
Maybe
fair.
I could answer that question.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of layers. Obviously, it's not just one answer is going to definitively answer that question, but the best answer I can give you, and I think you could probably even see it yourself, if you put a NASCAR car next to a Formula One car, which one looks like it could actually be on the road and kind of drive around among us? Like the NASCAR series is based off of stock car racing. All the guys did back in the day was moonshine runners. They souped up their cars to try and outrun the police. That is the beginnings of NASCAR. Formula One was created as a means of like technological improvement and cars that aren't street cars, but they're meant to go head to head in the fiercest competitions ever on the racetrack. So if you look just physically at the two, they look so different. And secondly, it's the cultural like beginnings basically. Formula One was designed and bred to start as a racing series. NASCAR literally was a couple of good old boys in the South that wanted to try and run away from the cops. So
Yep.
culturally, there's a massive difference.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
you could compare like NASCAR to like being like the Dukes of Hazards. And then you have like Formula One being like, Ford versus Ferrari type of a thing,
Yeah. Yep.
I like that you mentioned kind of the innovation part, because one of the cool things about F1 is that the engines that they use, for example, this year will most likely be in our road cars in a couple of years. It was created as a way to innovate for, road cars in the future, which is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. Sure.
Do you want to keep going, Marielle, or do you want to just keep going back and forth?
Let's go back and forth. You go.
Alrighty, so whoever wants to answer this question, jump in. But why do all these cars go around the track so many times? Like, why can't they just go around 10 times and call it a race? Like, I see, like, sometimes I feel like I've seen like 500 laps or like some crazy amount of number of laps.
I can take this one. So they have a set track, like the set distance. So each track will be a different number of miles. They're not all exactly the same because they race on a lot of street circuits and, circuits that are used by other things like MotoGP and so on and so forth. So they have a set race distance. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's 300 kilometers. And then based on that, they'll define how many laps they do in a race. And it's just a way to standardize so that on every track they do the same mileage.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
race is usually between like an hour and a half and 2 hours. So, like, you might say in a football game, like Penn State beats UMass by the second quarter. Let's just end the game there. But that's not how it works. We want to give some time for like the more competitive races. So that's why we make sure it's like around that 2 hour mark, is to give more competition. If we wanted a really short race, it would just be qualifying to see who could do one lap
Yeah.
the fastest. But there's so much more that goes into it, like the tire strategy I mentioned before, and also like racing and passing people and defending your position. There's a lot more that goes into racecraft than just going the fastest laps. So to allow for that, you want a longer race. Like the Indy 500 it's over 200 laps, so it's
Yeah.
500 miles. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, also brings
that's
up a
kind of
good
why
point,
races are pretty long.
Like, like you mentioned with the Indy 500, like, I mean, that's an oval track. So that's a real simple racetrack. That's just four corners turning left. And whereas, I mean, Formula One, it's mostly circuits and stuff like that have a lot more turns, a lot more complicated circuits like that. So when you have an oval like that, you're typically going to go a lot farther than you would on a typical like F1 circuit.
The last thing I could say is it's about the event too. Like if you were to go for a weekend, you get this many. Like what? Sao Paulo, they said they had 280,000 people. I think were there or something.
Something like that.
If you're there for 10 minutes just to see one guy go the fastest in one lap, come on, kind of a waste of money. So so it's about the longevity, and also that is technological stuff as well. You want the car to last a certain distance, stuff like that. We could even talk about another series, the endurance series, where it actually isn't based off of laps, like the amount of laps. It is based off of times, like the 24 hours at Le Mans. A car has to continuously run for 24 hours. So motorsports is different. It's different all around. You could find something that like pick your poison, basically.
Yeah.
Good answers.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Another thing also, just add quickly because I thought of it, there's also the aspect of like TV, right? Because you have to be able to give them like a time slot. So if we're saying that all races are roughly about 2 hours, then they can slot that into TV. You can have commercials. You can kind of sell your rights that way. If you never know how long a race is going to be or going to last, then there's not really an easy way for you to sell your rights, I guess.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I guess we're going back and forth. So I'll take it. Okay, so this one was actually genuinely really confused about. Why do racers wear all their brand deals like on their race suits? Because if you think about it, like with other sports, like I'm not seeing like football teams coming out with like a UPS logo like on their chest. I was just like, why?
Yeah. I actually gave this a good amount of thought. And, the biggest thing that comes up, of course, is like a lot of things, is money. So especially for Formula One, like it's such an expensive sport to run, they're always trying to push the envelope. So you are always looking for it to make money. So sponsorships is a big part of that. And also, if you think about it this way as well, I mean, if you're a driver that wants to, race for, these are prestigious brands they're racing for. So, you have Aston Martin, Ferrari, McLaren. If you're a driver for that, there's a certain level of prestige that you get when you get to, walk around with like an Aston Martin emblem on your jersey every day. So it's mostly money, but it's also motivation and prestige as well.
Also, teams don't get ticket revenue. Like a football team, they get ticket revenue from people in the stands. In F1, all teams compete at the same time, and the track earns all the ticket revenue, not the teams. So the teams need to find out a different way to fund themselves outside of ticket revenue because they really don't get any. There is some prize money based on your finishing position, but a lot of the money comes from like the sponsors you see. So that's why they're usually just fully loaded in sponsors.
Yeah. It's almost the same thing with like golf as well, because, golfers don't get ticket revenue, kind of like what you said. So they have to get money from their sponsors as well. So it's like kind of like the same thing there.
That's actually a really good comparison because like the same thing I was going to say is the whole point of motorsports is you have this just absolutely ludicrously fast metal machine just flying down the track, and all it's meant to do basically that whole race is be a flying banner for Red Bull, for Aston Martin. I mean, you even mentioned it yourself, and Jason's wearing it right there. He's got Shell and UPS on his hoodie. Like, I mean, that's the whole point. So yeah.
Also races, I don't know if you've ever watched a full race, but races don't have commercials. So the commercials, the brands that we would normally see during a commercial break is kind of what they try and do with the race suits on the cars. Along the sides of the track, there's always like logos and stuff because that's their way of being able to show their sponsors and be able to make revenue because there's not ad breaks every 5 minutes like we have in a lot of other American sports.
Right, that makes sense. Thanks.
Alrighty, so I know, like, because I'm very knowledgeable about hockey. If you didn't know that already, So if someone were to ask me, what are the majority of the people that drive F1? What are their nationalities? Or like, if someone were to ask you hockey, I'd say U.S., Canada. So what nationality are the majority of F1 drivers?
Marina, I feel like you can tackle this question, or Steven. I feel like the two of you guys definitely nail it.
Yeah, I mean, having thought about it, I would say I don't think there's one you can put there's like a majority of. Like there's a huge mix, but if I had to point to one, I guess it would be British.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you have Lando, you have George, you have a few others as well.
A
I mean,
lot
I
of
don't know if
teams are
that's
based
both.
out of England.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
like fun fact is that's where F1 started, was in the
Yeah.
UK. So
Yeah.
fundamentally, like it has its home there. So a lot of teams and everyone love it there. So that's where a majority of the drivers do come from. But it is an international sport. We race everywhere. It's around on every continent except for Antarctica, I believe.
We don't race in Africa.
Africa as well.
We used to, but not anymore.
Yeah, not anymore.
Yeah. Which fundamentally could change. Who knows? Schedule's always changing. But because of international representation within the sport, there's a diverse variety of drivers on the grid. And you could even look at F2 and F3. It's the same thing. They're basically the college divisions, F2 and F3. F1 is like the NFL.
Yeah. That's what I was going to point out as well. Is also like the feeder series, which would be like he said, kind of like college, like Formula 2, Formula 3, Formula 4. They're mostly based out of Europe. Like F1 will go to the US, for example. I was at the race in Austin. There's no F2, F3 in Austin because they only race in Europe. So a lot of like the biggest karting scenes, which is kind of how they get into it as well, they're based in Europe. So you definitely see more European drivers than anything else. But Europe is not like one nationality, right? It's more of it's a whole continent.
Yeah.
But definitely based on that side of the globe is where most of the drivers come from. But there's also like a long line of racing history from a lot of countries. You know, like Brazil, with one of the greatest racers of all time, Ayrton Senna. It kind of creates like this passion around racing for a long time to come. So that kind of, I think, dictates a bit of like where the major nationalities are coming from. Because if Senna was there and then we started seeing a lot more Brazilian drivers after him. But now that we kind of don't have any Brazilian drivers, you don't see as many up and coming Brazilian drivers either. So it kind of defined by a bit of the success of the sport and who's thriving.
Awesome.
Good questions, guys.
Okay.
Yeah, I like this.
Okay, my next question. How are like the drivers chosen? Like, because like I know most sports like they do a draft or something. Like, is it similar to that, or did they just spot one on the street and be like, I want you? Like,
so that's kind of where Formula One is pretty unique. So obviously you guys can chime in as much as you want. Like if I go off the beaten track, but motorsports as a whole, it isn't like. You don't sign up for the F1 motorsport team at Penn State.
Everybody's a free agency.
Yeah, everyone's free agency. You're fighting for your position. Especially, that actually kind of comes back to sponsorship. Like, sponsorship is a big thing nowadays where everything's so expensive that you might not even be, like, the best driver on the grid, but if you bring us, like, $100 million sponsorship deal with you, that's how you get chosen. It's a big deal. Like we said, there is F2 and F3, which is our, like, college series. But you start at the ground level. Marina actually mentioned it a second ago, like go-karting. You start small. Get into the smaller series that are affordable when you're a child and move up through the ranks. We could probably put together a spreadsheet of the different series that you could go through all the way until you get to F1. I mean,
it's crazy.
There's like, you could even start in America, possibly racing in the NASCAR series, and all of a sudden be like, I got an offer to go try an F1 car. Boom, I'm going to go do it. So,
yeah.
There's a ton of minor leagues. There's not just one, like MLB has, the A and then AA, AAA. Like that's only one league series. F1, there's so many different leagues and everywhere. It's a ton of different paths you could get to Formula One.
I think what Tristan said also, like you said, there's the F2, there's F3, there's F4. But also, I mean, if you're good enough, you can get into, so teams also have like, racing schools. So, you could be a part of Red Bull Racing School, Ferrari, McLaren, and you could be a driver with them, which would kind of be like, it's kind of like an elongated recruiting process, if that makes sense. Like, you get recruited for that team, you're still kind of, I mean, you race for them, but you're also racing for like, F2, F3, F4. But also, like Tristan said, you could be a NASCAR driver, you could be an IndyCar driver, you could be really in any series. And if you're good enough and they see something that they like, you'll be like, hey, you want to try out a Formula One car? And after that, you're like, okay, yeah, I'm with Ferrari now, so now I'm like one of their driving school guys. So
Yeah.
yeah,
It would
there's a
be
lot of
like
different paths.
if Joe Burrow was signed while he was still at LSU, and who does he play? The Bengals, and the Bengals said, once you win at LSU, we'll move you up to the NFL team. That's kind of how F1 works. Is the teams choose, and sometimes they'll sign these like junior contracts that say, all right, we're gonna sign with you, and if you do good enough, we'll move you up to the F1 team. That's
a great
bit of the
comparison.
Yeah, it's not even they've talked about it a lot. It's not even like if they do go the junior categories, where it's like F4, F3, F2. It's not even a strict like path, so they can go from F4 to F2 and not even do F3, and they can and through these series, the only one strict thing or two strict rules to get into F1 is you have to have the super license points, which I talked about in my Fun Fact Friday this week, which basically they accumulate points by getting certain positions at the end of the season in the championships. And then so that's how they kind of like move up. They also have to be 18. So that's the only rule, and that's a rule that changed after my favorite Max Verstappen joined F1. He was only 17. And after he came in, he will forever be the youngest F1 driver because now we have a rule that they have to be 18. So there's only those two rules. But other than that, it's kind of, like they said, free agency. And they can kind of go wherever and whenever, even in the middle of the season. Like we saw this driver swap in the middle of the season because they just weren't performing.
Well, let it be known. That's another thing. I was just about to say that. You do have to perform, though. Like, fundamentally, like, you could be a really bad driver and still land a top ride. But within a year or so, if you're wrecking like 10 cars or whatever you're doing, they're going to get rid of you. I mean, it's just money can only get you so far. So performance is still important.
And there's no shortage of talent. There's always going to be a next guy up.
Yep.
I don't even know how many people are on like an NHL team or an NFL team. I think NFL is like 50.
Yeah, like 56.
There's only 20 spots. So you have to be the best of the best of the best to race in F1. And if you don't cut it anymore, you're gone. So it's really competitive.
All right, my next question is, how often are F1 races?
Kind of every
basically when's the season?
So the season starts, usually it's in March, but this coming year it's going to start at the very end of February, and it usually ends between the end of November and the very early December. So they have that whole thing, but they don't do races every week. Sometimes they have races like 3 races in a row, 3 race weekends in a row, and sometimes they have like 2 weeks with no races. And they also get like a summer break in August where they don't race for like, I want to say it's 3 weekends or 4 weekends. So they get like a little bit of break because they are, a bit of a difference, say, from other like NFL, NHL. It's mostly, well, I guess NFL more. It's all in the US, except for now they had like the game in Germany. But like, yeah, you're flying from maybe New York to LA is like one of the farthest you'll go, but it's not these big trips. They're flying from they flew from Qatar to Austin. So it's really stressful, like the flying and stuff. So they get a little bit of a break. Other than that, they're racing, all the time from basically the whole year.
Yeah, they get breaks. And then also, that's actually kind of one of the main things why I fell in love with motorsports as a kid. Because fundamentally, from basically February until like late November to early December, there's cars on the track. Like always.
Yep.
You get like a month, like 2 months basically of off season, and then it's lights out, you're back to it. F1's back, NASCAR's back, everything's back. Like it's one of the main reasons why I really like it, and that just shows like F1 motorsports as a whole. We go the distance. Those seasons are very long.
I was going to say to that point as well. Now, this doesn't happen, I don't think, as much as in F1, but in NASCAR, for example, if you're a guy, now this even happens during the season. You'll have guys on off weekends or even up to the races where they'll be, you'll be, say, in F1. Again, this is kind of a bad example because they don't do this so much in F1, but say you're an F1 driver and you have an off week. You can be like, oh, I want to get some practice and keep my experience up. So I'm going to go into F2 and run a race and just see how I do to keep
that
my
happens
experience
a lot
up.
in NASCAR, where
Right.
they'll go from the top NASCAR series to like the second tier NASCAR series and race there. So yeah, some drivers do both series. Like IndyCar drivers will also race in IMSA, which is another racing series. So they don't like play in one series only. F1 they do because F1 is that intense and across the
Yeah.
globe.
Yeah.
But yeah, some drivers will run in multiple series at the same time.
That could be a competitive advantage too. Again, not so much in F1, but if you're in NASCAR and you say, you want to drop back down to the lower series, which would be like Xfinity, and they're racing the same track you are, you're getting a competitive edge by going to that lower series and getting experience in that track before you go to run in that in the main Cup series.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, let's get one last question from you, Marielle, before we move on to our breaking news.
Okay. I'll end with a silly question. Okay. And so before I feel like I've learned a lot. So I'm gonna tweak the question a little bit, because before this I thought like that all these racing competitions was basically like the Pixar movie Cars, okay? But now I'm realized that might be more akin to NASCAR than it might be to F1.
You nailed it.
See, I'm learning something.
Proud.
There you go.
Proud.
Yeah. Well, actually, you're sort of partially right, because Cars 2 is the closest you can get, basically, in the Cars world to F1. They go on the international circuit. There's actually an F1. Oh, my God. I don't have Cars knowledge on the top of my head. What's the guy's name? What's the F1
It's like
Cars
Fernando
name?
or something.
Yeah.
Oh, Sebastian Vettel did a cameo. So they did like cameos where they were cars on cars.
Yeah, Lewis Hamilton was in it. He did like a voice thing, too. Yeah.
Schumacher was in the first Cars.
Yes. Yeah, he was at the end. He was the Ferrari.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, you're not wrong. Like, it is actually very fair to, like, line them up, because Cars 2 does do that. But, goofy question nonetheless. I liked it. I thought I liked that idea.
The thing I would say, too, is, though, to your point, I think it was Cars 2, and correct me if I'm wrong, that, to me, is a lot like WEC.
Endurance? I mean...
Yeah, because, I mean, the thing is, especially, like, the last one, because you did have a NASCAR run in Le Mans. So,
yeah, that's true. That is true.
Yeah, so you have that, and I mean, there isn't really one that's like an F1. Like the closest one I could think of to like an F1 car would be they don't run anymore. But I'm gonna have to think of what it's called. It's like there's a 3-wheeled car that used to run in WEC that kind of reminds me of like an F1 car.
You're gonna have to think about that one. See if you can remember by the end of the show.
Yeah.
But
I forget what it's called, but yeah.
I like that you brought up a Disney movie, because Disney actually owns Formula One as a whole. And
no, they don't.
They do. Disney owns ESPN, which owns F1.
No,
well,
ESPN doesn't own F1. It's sorry to cut you off here, but this is the Liberty Media.
You're pushing Jason's buttons.
Liberty Media.
Oh
owns
yeah, no, he's right.
Disney owns ESPN, which has the broadcasting rights. So ESPN doesn't own F1; they just own the broadcasting rights. F1 management is completely separate. Liberty Media, they run Ticketmaster. That's what they do. They own Formula One.
Metaphorically speaking,
I actually have a question.
I spoke.
All I was gonna say, metaphorically speaking, if you own the broadcasting rights, you kind of own the sport. I mean, obviously, it's in a metaphor type way, but if you can't watch the sport, then fundamentally.
That actually brings up a question for me. Like, so then, does Liberty Media own the FIA, or is that different?
No, FIA is like FIFA is to soccer. Like, you could have your own separate leagues and teams, but they set the rules, and they're nonprofit. So the FIA decides the rules, and then Formula One management decides. They make all the commercial decisions.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Well, on that kind of topic, Max was featured on a Time magazine, on the Time magazine cover for November, and he spoke. They talked about him, obviously, but they also spoke a lot about Liberty Media, and they spoke about how his dominance is affecting the sport. But last year, they made $2.57 billion in revenue with a B, and that's up 44% from 2017. So I don't see the clear connection they were trying to make with including that stat, but they did talk about that, and I think that's interesting to talk about as well, because it's up so much, but there's so much talk of like, this is ruining the sport because he's so dominant. And I want to get you guys' thoughts on it because, it's obviously happened in other sports. Max actually mentioned in the article, he was quoted saying, me winning all these races is like the Bulls dominating in the NBA. Like, it's the same thing. I'm just dominating the whole thing. And I like his point as to like, do you think that ruined the NBA? Because I personally don't think it did.
No.
I don't think the thing I'll say with motorsports is though, like, I mean, I like the comparison you made, but it's so much more than the driver. Like, it's the car, it's the crews, it's the technology, it's all of that. So, I mean, I definitely still think like it hurts the sport, but not in the same way it would do for like the Bulls like being dominant in basketball.
Well, let's ask our two guests here. So before we even got to asking you guys about coming on the podcast and all that, was there any instances where you guys really heard about Formula One, like commercially or anything like that had you interested? Because obviously, I'm going to bring an example. Drive to Survive. That was a huge deal with the F1 community when it came out on Netflix. And everyone got like someone involved. Like a lot of people that aren't even like big fans of the sport but still watched it and became fans. I would actually like to say that probably is actually a big reason as to why that number is so high up, because more commercial viewing is happening, and in general, business is just better. But for you guys, is there any connection to like maybe how you think that number is up because maybe you guys just have a subtle amount of like interest, and that maybe the whole populace is doing that?
Well, me personally, like I don't really see a ton of F1 ads, like just in general. So like I feel like I should see more because they have so much money into the sport and all that stuff. So I feel like in the future they should really try and like market and make like more ads and stuff like that, like on ESPN because they own the rights, right? So
That's actually a good point. Yeah.
I mean, you see tons of like ads about the upcoming games and stuff like that. I mean, I feel like I've been seeing the ad for who's playing on Christmas and on Thanksgiving for the NFL for forever. And if you don't see anything about like the Vegas Grand Prix, which is next weekend, but Tristan touched on Netflix. Netflix is doing an event called the Netflix Cup next week on the 14th. It's going to be their first live stream event, and it's between the Formula One / Drive to Survive drivers and 4 full swing golfers, which is going to be super cool. The Braun GP story, which is a movie featuring Keanu Reeves, is also coming out on the 15th on Hulu and Disney Plus. But getting back a little bit to racing, Ferrari has officially started contract negotiations with Charles Leclerc. Jason, I want to know how you feel like about this, because for me, I feel like they need to get this done ASAP because it's just going downhill at Ferrari.
Yeah, it's been a really rough year for Ferrari. I don't think Leclerc will leave. He really wants the Ferrari dream to happen. And if Red Bull would have wanted him, they already had him already. Like, Red Bull has the money, they have the car. Like, they would have taken him already. I think he'll stick with the team. Of course, you're a little nervous, like, oh, will he pull Daniel Ricciardo and go to, like, a lower team that's on the way up? But even now, after seeing Ricciardo leave Red Bull, go to Renault, and then go to McLaren, and almost kill his career, I think Leclerc is probably too scared to do that. It's like, yeah, I'm going to stay here where I'm like maybe probably going to win in a couple of years. So he's taking the bet. I think he'll stick around. I'm not that nervous about him leaving. I'm a bit more nervous about Sainz leaving. There's been some rumors he's going to go to Audi when Audi enters the sport.
That makes a lot of sense.
We'll see about that. Hopefully it's a long-term contract because I think Leclerc is good. And even if it's not, well, there'll be somebody else. There's just too much talent on the way up right now. I think we'll be fine.
Let's go into this coming weekend. You guys probably haven't heard much about it because, again, this isn't very public. I feel like the Vegas Grand Prix is so big in the F1 community, but other people that don't live in Vegas don't even know really what's going on. But Vegas residents are really unhappy with Formula One in general. There's been trees cut down all down the strip, which my argument to that is they're just going to replant the trees when it's done. But anyways, there's been trees cut down all down the strip. They're covering up and obstructing the views to big hotels, to the fountains. And there's just been overall so much construction as they put up these grandstands and redo the roads and all this stuff. So they're not happy.
Rightfully
You know,
so.
I think it's definitely causing more bad than good. I mean, I think to your point, actually with like the tree thing, for example. Now, coming from a dad who's a big horticulture guy, I know that, trees, especially in those types of environments, aren't actually good for them or like the environment. But also, it forces the Department of Transportation in Nevada, for example, to actually, put money and time and effort into making improvements to the road, which is always good. But at the end of the day, I think, I'm not sure who said it, but I saw somewhere that it's going to be like 2.8 billion to like, fix everything and put everything up that they need to do for that race, which is, I think, more than is said to set up the Super Bowl, which is crazy.
Well, it better be good. I think it's like a 5-year contract, Las Vegas Grand Prix, right?
Is it that
Yeah.
long?
Yeah.
Dang.
To your point,
Better be good.
a lot of the articles said the estimated economic impact only on Las Vegas was going to be $1.3 billion, which is supposed to be double that of what the Super Bowl brought.
That's what I was getting at.
So, and that's not just, we're not talking about ticket sales or anything. We're talking about just strictly the economic impact of having all these people come to a city. They're spending hundreds of thousands. I mean, there's a package for F1 that's $5 million. It's all these paddock stuff and like rooms and suites and stuff like that. So if you're spending that, you're not gonna like cheap out on drinks, right? You're not gonna cheap out on a hotel. So there's so much other stuff that I think is gonna have a positive impact on Vegas long term after they leave.
Yeah.
Like you said. So let's do we ran super long, so we're just gonna do that's clipped very quickly. Just one that's clipped video from the last race, which most of us we talked about it last week, really loved. So I don't know.
Oh man.
No way. Anyways,
The finish.
Like a 3-minute thing on. This was last 2 laps in Brazil last week.
Marielle Ethan, get locked in.
Yup.
This
One of
is
the craziest finishes. Wow.
The last lap of the race. 0.05?
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it was like
5/10 of a
5,000.
second.
Yeah.
Oops. This was over the line. It's a really blurry picture, but this was them over the line.
So that is Fernando Alonso, greatest F1 driver of all time, and and that's Sergio Perez. Fernando's in the green car, the Aston Martin car, and then right next to him is Sergio Perez in the Red Bull machine. And they were going at it for about 15 laps at the end, obviously just to help inform Marielle and Ethan. And on the second to last lap, was it the last lap? I always get this confused. We were talking about this.
Second to last lap.
Yeah, it starts second to last lap.
Yeah, and then last lap is when he gets him back. They pass on the second last lap. Sergio Perez gets ahead. Fernando doesn't give up hope, stays right behind him, passes him again on the last lap. Incredible. I mean, again, I wish we had a video recording of us when we reacted to the race live. Because, first of all, the emotion from Marina, I mean, we like to see it. Because, I mean, again, I had said it throughout the whole race. His pace was good, Fernando. I was like, if he could just get on podium, I'd be happy. It'd be cool. Of course he did. So, you're happy with that.
Yeah, a close finish like that is really rare because, like Ethan said, these are long events. And usually, eventually, the fastest drivers will filter out and get space between them. So to see a finish like that, that's like less than 1/10 of a second
gold.
After almost 2 hours of racing is just insane of how close these drivers are.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, real quick before last little thing, I know Ethan and Marielle, they don't watch much F1, but I do want to get our hosts' predictions for the next race. Who is your P1, P2, and P3 for the race in Vegas? Please do take into account that this is it's a street circuit and it's long straights. So
Yeah, so Red Bull won too. So just a little tidbit for you guys is that Red Bull is the most dominant team for sure in the series right now.
Right
and
now.
and straightaways,
Absolutely.
not turns, straightaways. They definitely have the raw power output above anyone else. So
Yep.
Vegas, if you actually look at the map, if you get a chance after the pod, it literally looks like a pig upside down. It's got a straight little like turn thing, and then
Straight
another
ahead.
straight. Yeah,
It looks like a-
exactly. So with a lot of straightaways, I am actually going to say that. I'm going to say Max Verstappen P1, Sergio Perez P2, Checo, and then P3. I'm going to give it to Lando. I think Lando keeps up his pace. I think he's going to be quick. I don't think Fernando is going to have the speed for some. It's not my. It's
I
not my
agree.
gut.
Yeah.
So I think Lando Norris is going to be P3.
I like that.
Yeah, there it is. Boom.
Wow, it really does look
Literally
like
an upside
that's
down
actually
pig.
crazy.
Yeah, that's
Go
a
on.
track map. So if I like, oh no, my phone's gonna flip. Yeah, it's like a big back.
An upside down pig.
Yeah.
All right, what
Yeah.
about you, Steven? Top 3.
Yeah, so I'm definitely gonna go Max number 1. I don't think it's gonna be a Red Bull 1-2 though.
Ooh.
P2 is tricky. I think I will go Lando P2. As much as that kind of hurts me to say for him to get another P2, but yeah, I'll go Max P1, Lando P2, P3. This is kind of a curveball, but I want to go Lewis. I want to go Lewis 3.
Okay.
I completely disagree.
Dang.
Fair enough.
Lewis, I think my grandma is a super Lewis Hamilton fan, and she was texting me during that race last week, and she was like, they're like 40 kilometers slower down
They
the
were
street.
so slow.
This is true.
I'm definitely not going Lewis. I'm going to go with a little bit of a different one, though, because I think Alex Albon has showed so much pace recently, and the Williams is so fast down the
That
street.
is true.
I'm
That
going
is true.
Max Verstappen P1, Lando Norris P2, and an Alex Albon podium P3. Probably not going to happen, but my delusional thinking can't help it.
That's
Fair
fair.
enough.
That
That's
would
fair.
be an epic race if that happens. I'm gonna go Max P1, Norris P2 because McLaren is just insane.
Yeah.
And Sainz P3 because he won at Singapore. Ferrari has had his, that pace at like a night track. It's colder out. They're better at heating up the tires. And Singapore has a couple fast sections. I think it'll suit the Ferrari really well. And Sainz killed it in Singapore. So I think he's going to do it again. He's going to be on the podium somewhere. So
All right.
Good.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you, Marielle and Ethan, for coming on. We loved your questions, and we hope that you come on the podcast sometime later. If you guys want more from us, we do have our Instagram and our TikTok at Lights Out Latest. We do Tech Tuesdays, WAG Wednesdays, Throwback Thursdays, Fun Fact Fridays, and recently started a Man on the Street with Tristan's first video. Steven's first video.
You say I'm not gonna.
It's all good.
Forgive me, it's Jason, Tristan, and Steven. It doesn't help a lot, guys. Anyway,
That's fair.
thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.